Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Fair Game Podcast. We have a fantastic show for you today. Today's guest is a young rising star in our industry. She joins us today from Douglas, Wyoming, where she's the fair manager of the Wyoming State Fair. Courtny Conkle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me today, Robert. I'm excited for our conversation.
Same. I've always admired your tenacity as a young upstart in the industry and seen what you've been able to accomplish. So let's talk about your Wyoming State Fair. What are you looking at for dates this year?
This year in 2024, we're August 13th through 17th. We're a 5-day fair that takes place annually in August. And this year we're celebrating 119 years.
That's pretty impressive. 119 years. What's your attendance usually look like for that fair?
So our attendance is generally about 77,000 people. So it's not a huge state fair, but one thing I think is really interesting, the total population of Wyoming is just over 580,000 people. So for the 10th largest state geographically and the sparsest population.
Yes, that's so. I having done your fair a year ago, finally got to go see what it looks like and see how things go. I mean, everything out there is isolated. I mean, there's a reason that the United States military has nuclear silos out that way because there are miles and miles of nothing, and yet you still manage to draw 77,000 into your fair in 5 days.
Yes, I mean, I think because of the sparse population and just the rolling space between town to town, it makes those types of community events or state events that much more impactful because there's just less opportunity for it. And year round, I mean, we're operating right now with about 575 event days a year. So outside of state fair, we're churning and burning with multiple events every single day of the year, drawing about 300,000 people. So the Wyoming State Fairgrounds is really a hub for community vitality and state vitality, not just for fair time, but all year.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got a great little fair. Um, the folks always seemed, when I was there, everybody seemed to be super nice. It's just a really nice demographic of people that you have up there. Um, but I wanted to talk about, I was reading, I think you had posted about it, and then I went and I read an article on it. Last month, you guys announced you had secured $1 million for the fair. That's no small feat. Can you talk about that?
Oh my gosh, I would be happy to. It has been the most inspirational and humbling experience. Last year, we were given the opportunity by the Wyoming legislative body to raise up to $500,000, but there was two catches. Catch one, we had to do it all by June of 2024. So we would have just about a year to raise the funds. And second thing was with this matching fund campaign, if we didn't hit $500,000, there would be no match. So kind of an all or
All or
nothing. So if we
nothing.
got to $499,000, we would have $499,000. It would not be
Wow.
multiplied. And historically, the largest fundraising effort we had ever done with capital campaigning had been $100,000 over the course of 2 years. So this was going to be a big lift for us, but we were able to compile a team, a steering committee, bring on board somebody that specializes in fundraising and capital development that now works with us for the state fair. And in April, we were able to meet the $500,000 goal, which has been just phenomenal. But I have to say the most inspiring part is it didn't stop there. So people still wanted to be a part of contributing to the
Wow.
future of the fair. So as of this week, we hit over $671,000 raised for the endowment fund. And
So will
this
that
is
full amount be matched also?
it won't. So we'll have the 500,000 will get
Okay.
matched.
So there was a
So right
cap on the
now
match.
there is a cap on that particular match. So as of this week, we're looking at 1.17 is about what we'll anticipate by the end of this month. So just such a relief when we hit that $500,000 mark because we had a lot of people come to us and say, "Gosh, good luck. We're interested to
Ambitious.
see how this goes." Yes, ambitious, and I think sometimes ambition can get tied to being overly optimistic or being naive, but we're a pretty aggressive group. And people love what the fair represents. And I think that people are really at a place right now where all of us want to be a part of something good, a part of something that makes the world a better place, a part of something that secures a future that has a bright outlook, that those values are there, the integrity's there. And fairs capture so much of that. So I think it's really been inspiring for people to get to be involved in the future of that as well.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, 1.1, 1.2 million, that for a fair like yours, that is a huge chunk of cash. What is it going to go towards?
So we have something really cool here. It's called the Wyoming State Fair Endowment Fund, and it is set up as a perpetual trust fund. So it's managed by the state treasurer's office, and we get 25% of the interest that's garnered off of that comes to us to help us with operations, and 75% gets reinvested into that endowment fund.
Okay.
And so the endowment fund is continuing to grow and grow and grow. So we will eventually get it to a place where the Wyoming State Fair fully operates off of the dividends. And then we've got this pool of money, so we're not having to go and ask for general fund monies. We're able to reinvest in the state fair production wise, as well as the state fairgrounds. And I think what this really stands for is a sustainable future for the state fair.
Sure. That's pretty
And
impressive.
when we get to July 1st, we'll be sitting at just over $5 million in that perpetual trust fund. And we just started that in 2018. So it's been able to grow pretty rapidly so far. And our goal is to get it to 10 million in 10 years.
Wow. Well, this is definitely going to help give that a little shot in the arm to grow that number towards 10 million.
Certainly. And this has been a really great way to get the general public involved in the state fair. That maybe some of these folks are new donors to the fair. They haven't had the history or the relationships with the organization before. So it has just opened up our mind so much to the possibilities that are out there for every fair. I mean, this kind of shows us that we can make these connections, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the same pools that we constantly pull from. We can expand that, educate more people about the impact of the fair, and get more engagement. So I just, it's been inspiring for me, but I also think it's something that's really replicable across the country and across the world to be able to use this model.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you are, if I'm not mistaken, one of the youngest fair managers in the industry.
I think it's
Eh,
changing.
It's probably
I'm getting
changing.
older.
It's probably changing because I think last time we talked, that would have been the COVID year. So that would have been late 2020, I think, when we did your episode last, when you were last on the show. So you were what, like 24, 25 at that point?
Yeah, I would have been about 25 at that point. Um, and I had a really unique opportunity to become a fair manager because I served as an interim CEO at age 20.
Yeah.
And that just somehow the stars aligned. We were experiencing a ton of turnover within the industry.
Yep.
And then I became a permanent CEO at 21. So
Yeah.
this is my ninth season managing, um, 12th season, 13th season in the administrative side of
Sure.
fairs. And it's really exciting to see sort of that next generation of leadership come into the industry. Um, it's been fascinating for me here because even just within our team now, I'm like our middle point. So we've even seen a significant age down just at the
Yeah.
Wyoming State Fair in the last 5 years.
Yeah, and I was actually just getting ready to switch over to that, talking about how our industry is aging down, and fairly dramatically. I think of names like Katie Porterfield, Cody Cashman, Jen Dunn, Courtney Conkle, but at the same time, we're seeing industry veterans like Bob Hilburn, John Sykes, Marla Calico this year retiring at the end of 2024. How important is it that we preserve that legacy and wealth of knowledge that these industry veterans have left us?
Gosh, it's probably the most important thing we can do for the future affairs. Um, we are at such a junction with the turnover in the fair space that the rate at which we're losing institutional knowledge is just crazy dramatic. We've got people that have been in the fair space, fair industry sector for 30, 40, 50 years. that have so much lived experience. We've got to capture that. Um, we work in such an interesting industry because it's not like a lot of things where you can hop on AI or you can Google it. We have the people that house those stories and understand the nuances of our industry. And if we don't capture that intentionally, we're going to lose it. And that's one of my just big fears for the future of the industry. And I think the time is now for us to really make an effort to make sure that we've got that compilation. I think that that's one of the reasons what you do on the podcast is so important, because it's like oral history. You're getting people's stories, those perspectives, and it's in a way that's really digestible for people to listen to and enjoy and learn from.
Sure.
But it's just it's vital for the future of what we do.
Can you talk about someone in our industry who has most influenced your career?
I think we're lucky to work in a space where there's so much influence that it's hard to pick those standouts, because there's certain people that have just influenced me more than they will ever know. But somebody that's been on my mind a lot lately is Barb Renner, who was the manager of North Idaho in Coeur d'Alene, and she shattered so many of the glass ceilings for women in the fair industry. You know, she was the first female chair of the IAFE. She's in the IAFE Hall of Fame, Rocky Mountain Hall of Fame, past Fair Manager of the Year. But I think that what I learned from her was if there's not a space at the table, you can make the space at the table. Diversity is important. Um, we're seeing more and more female leadership, but that's shifted even dramatically just in the last 10 years since I became a fair manager. We see more equal opportunity. We see more of a drive for diversity in the industry. But I think that Barb was somebody that made that possible for people like me to have the opportunities that I have today.
Yeah, for sure. Did you always want to be a fair manager?
I didn't. I wanted to be, um, and I still think that this kind of goes hand in hand, honestly. I really thought about going into political strategy or tacticianism, which is like who you call when things go bad in your political career. It's kind of the cleanup guy. But when I was in, gosh, junior high is when California Fair funding got cut overnight. So if you're not familiar with the California Fair system and you're listening to this, California Fairs used to be just they had a really, really solid system and a really solid funding mechanism. And that changed in one budget session. My family has concessions and they depend on the California fair system. So they go to about 25 California fairs a year. There was so much fear that that was the end of the industry in California. And those fairs have done the very best they can at diversifying revenues and learning how to succeed with a business structure. But that's when I realized that we need more people that have that entrepreneurial spirit, that business mindset to go into the fair management space to be able to do both things. You can live the mission and the values and you can operate it like a business so that there's sustainability behind it.
For sure. What is it you love most about what you do?
I love fairs in general. And I love the preservation of what they mean for our communities. They're all it's like snowflakes. Everyone's a little bit different. Everyone's got it's a representation of the people they serve. It's a direct reflection of the communities, the states, the regions, the countries. And that's what makes me feel like there's just boundless opportunity in fair management. The Wyoming State Fair, my job is to be the mirror to reflect back the best of the state. And that's true for all of us, whether we're at a small state fair like the Wyoming State Fair, a massive fair like the Big E or Texas State Fair, or if we're at a smaller county fair. It's just a beautiful way to get to kind of show the tapestry of who you represent. That's my
Yeah.
very favorite part.
Yeah, I can absolutely agree with that. As an entertainer who gets to travel coast to coast and see all these different communities and see how people do things differently. That's the type of, I guess for me, the cultural education for me you know, because of what a fair looks like in Florida is much different than what it looks like in Wyoming or Southern California or Illinois. And that's one of those things. I'm with you. I really enjoy that.
Well, and I think the beautiful part of that is they should. I mean, if we're visiting a fair in Canada or Australia, it should be a fairly different experience. It's still the same core, right? Still the same core values generally,
Sure.
but the way that it manifests is just so cool and different. I try to go to my goal is always 10 new fairs every year and then one trip out of the country a year because you learn so much going to those different events. And
Yeah.
one of my very favorites that I just have to share is about 5, 6 years ago, me and my dad did a quick trip to London and we hit 15 fun fairs in 10 days. But we ended with the Carter Steam Fair, which is a carnival that is still coal powered. And it's
Coal
just the kind of thing
coal
that coal
powered.
coal powered. So you've got workers there that are powering some of the carnival rides literally with
So not
coal.
off of diesel generators like everything runs now, off of coal
No,
power. And
coal.
where is this?
That was in London.
In London. Oh my God.
But
That's wild.
I've been to, gosh, we're approaching 350 different fairs that I've been to. And that's the only time I've ever seen anything like that. So you just and it's a unique, right? And so we all have something like that at each of our fairs. For us here in Wyoming, we've got the sheep wagon show, and those sheep wagons are hundreds of years old. It's crazy and it's amazing, and you don't see that everywhere. So even though the core values, we see a lot of crossover, of course, with agriculture, education, youth development, but there's still that little niche. We've all got something that makes us different, and I'm a strong believer that different is better than best.
Yes. I absolutely agree. One of the things I love about being here in New Mexico, and I see this here, and I've seen it at a couple fairs in Arizona, which would make sense when I say what it is. But here in New Mexico, we almost always have one of the local pueblos come out with their native dancers in all their garb. I guess I grew up calling them eagle dancers. I know different tribes have different names for them, but they come out and they sing their songs, their traditional native songs in all their native outfits. They bang their drums. And for a lot of people in New Mexico, having spoken with them, they're like, "Yeah, it's okay," because when you grow up around it, we've seen it. But I'm the one out of that group that goes to all these different fairs, and you never see anything like that at almost any other fair. New Mexico fairs have them. Arizona fairs have them. There might be a few other around the country that still do it, but it is so cool to see. It really is cool.
I love that. And it's different and it's a representation of the region that it serves, right? And
Absolutely.
that's what makes it just so cool.
Right. Well, and Dan Morning, Dan and I are good friends. He's the fair manager down here at New Mexico State Fair. He would say that the New Mexico State Fair needs to be a reflection of its community. And so we have 19 Native American pueblos in the state. And so, yeah, you're darn right. We should have somebody representing those pueblos and be saying, "Hey, here's what we've got." And then there's even an entire building that's got Native American art and from all these different pueblos. And so I think that's fabulous. Even though I've grown up with it, I grew up with mariachis, right? It's New Mexico. This is part of the culture here. It's still kind of cool to see it all at one place where you have guests that come into the New Mexico State Fair that are from outsiders. Like when WFA does a fair visit, and a lot of WFA fairs come in, if they've never seen something like that, like you going to London and seeing a coal powered carnival, like that's amazing. That's a cool experience.
Well, and it's kind of like native animals too, where we always take for granted what we have in our own backyard.
Sure.
And so we also have to remember that when we've got those outside visitors, you're spot on. They come to our different regions or our fairs and they're blown away by the things that we probably take the most for granted
Yes,
because of those differences. So it's just really super fun to get to be a part of that story, I think.
for sure. I wanted to talk for a second about some of the advantages and some of the challenges that the younger generation of fair managers is seeing. What are some of the advantages you think you've got as a young fair professional?
I think like all things, there's advantages and disadvantages. I feel like as somebody that kind of gets to watch so many new fair managers come into the space, we have a significant issue with retention. And that's industry wide right now. That's something that we've really got to figure out how we combat, how we get people to be able to have longer careers in fair management. We're seeing really some exciting new members come into the fair space in management positions. And then we are unfortunately seeing a lot of them leave fair management altogether. So whereas, 20, 30 years ago, we might see somebody move to a different position within the industry or move to a different fair, but it was really rare to see people leave to go to the private sector.
Mm,
So I think we've got to figure some of that out. That's an issue not just for me and what we experience here at the state fair. That's an issue we're seeing everywhere. And I think the best thing we can do to combat that is succession planning because that'll help with getting people's sales up that much faster and giving them the tools to succeed. Um, Kind of like what we were talking about with just the things we take for granted because they're in our own backyards. We do the same thing with institutional knowledge. So if somebody just knows what their job is because they've done it for 20 years, it's really hard to get that on paper. And then
yes,
if you're planning a retirement or a transition or you get a different job, it makes it that much harder for the person that comes after you. So that's something I'm really passionate about as a fairly young professional in my career that will probably have more jobs between now and the time I retire is making sure that we're compiling what I do and how I do it. So somebody could change it. That's absolutely their prerogative, but they at least have the fundamental understanding of what the processes are that are in place.
sure. Well, and probably in addition to the what the processes are, it would make sense to also include maybe some commentary on why the process is that way. Because you think about 10 years from now, 15 years from now, somebody's got a challenge. They look back and they go, okay, well, back in Courtney's day, they did X, Y, and Z, but I don't understand why they did that. And so it's very easy to lose that knowledge where when you understand, when you get the context and you get the understanding for what was going on, all of a sudden there's a different value to that information and you can apply it differently.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. And there's also then that mutual respect and that trust that people did do the best they could with the information they had at the time or the resources they had at the time. And they're willing to share that with the next iteration of leadership. I think that if we can have a kind of a fundamental shift in our industry where we all embrace succession planning, we'll have better retention and we'll have more successful organizations because when somebody new comes in, you can get through almost a full year as a fair manager and not have touched everything that your job entails
Sure. And
because
that's
of
even
just
at
the
a
nature
small
of
fair.
the role.
That's even at a small fair, like in Wyoming. What happens when you're taking over a fair like, the New Mexico State Fair, the State Fair of Texas, or I mean, you know,
Mm,
these are massive events with a whole lot of moving parts.
absolutely. And what we do here is succession for each position, each key position, because arguably at those smaller fairs, it's even more impactful because people are wearing a lot of hats. There's a little bit less of a specialized position that deals with XYZ. There's a lot more cross pollination that's going on. But I'm a huge advocate for doing positional succession planning, whatever size your organization is, because then it also kind of helps to um, remove any stigma against gatekeeping or job security where gosh if I'm the one that holds all the information they can't get rid of me. It's like I want them to be okay if I have a family emergency and I can't be here.
Sure.
So um but I think that that's one of the opportunities that the next generation of leadership has because we're also not staying in roles as long. Right now, the national average is that people are staying in their jobs less than 24 months.
Yep.
So you stay there long enough to kind of know what the role is, and then you leave. So if
Right.
we're going to have that as a next generation of leadership when we're talking about younger professionals, we also have to figure out how we change the mentality for how we're getting people up and running as fast as possible, but also maintaining continuity in the event of turnover. 'Cause
For sure.
that's a huge challenge, but that's something we've got to figure out how to combat
Yep.
because it very well might be a cultural change where we don't see people that are at fairs for 25, 30 years in their same role anymore, we
Correct.
might see a little bit more of a jungle gym. And so I
Well,
think just preparing for that.
and we're seeing that in the private sector big time. I remember when I grew up, I graduated from college in 2001, but coming up, the idea was the same as my parents, the boomer generation that was, no, you get your degree and you start your career and maybe you have a couple of job changes in that time, but you do 18 years, you retire, you get the pension and the gold watch, right? That's what would happen. This younger generation has figured out a hack, and that is if they're switching every 18 months to 36 months, they're making way more money. That was the weird thing when I started hearing about all this. They're only staying in 18 months, 24 months. It was like, how nobody's going to hire you because now you're a liability. But companies have not only decided, yeah, we're going to hire them for this 2 years, but they made $67,000 at the previous one. I'm going to pay them 79. And then 2 years later, now they're getting 93. And now, 3 years later, they're getting 104. And it's like, okay, maybe they figured something out because if had I known that in my day, I might have done things differently.
And the job hopping culture right now is just it's crazy. So I think as employers, we've all got to figure out a hack too, where we're built on a strong enough foundation that if you've got a revolving door when it comes to leadership, the organization is going to be okay. So
Yes.
I just feel like when you're somewhere for 18 months, a couple years, it's really hard to work on the foundational elements of what you do. When we're talking about like the stuff that's not fun and sexy, we're talking about policies, procedures, infrastructure, human resources,
Yep.
team development. That stuff takes time. And
Yeah.
if
18 months, your
oh,
feet are barely wet.
you don't really, for me, it takes me a full year to know a job. It
Yep.
really does, just with the nature of what we do. And then that's just the fundamentals. I now understand what we do and how we do it. It takes years to understand the why, and it takes years to change. I think that after about 24 months, you can really start to see the impact that you're making within an
Yes.
organization or assess if it's an organization that you want to stay at or not. And I think that that's the other side of job hopping is I want people to be in roles that they love. I think life is too short to be somewhere that you are miserable at. And
Yes.
there's I know that that happens. I'm grateful for the fair space because I think that these are jobs that people can find a lot of fulfillment in, but they can also be draining. So I think the other thing we've got to keep working on as sort of our generation of leadership, we've got to work on the emotional intelligence side, the EQ, figuring out how we self-pace, self-regulate,
Yep.
and give ourselves some grace because there's not a lot of privacy or downtime or separation of work-life balance these days.
Yeah.
So we've got to figure out how to internalize some of that so that we can be in these positions with sustainability.
Yeah. Totally agree. You talk about a second ago how it can take you a year to 18 months just to really figure out the job. My wife is Sarah's an assistant principal in Albuquerque schools. And one of the things that we see happen, we're seeing it happen right now. We've got a brand new superintendent in the district. That new person comes in and it's change this, change that, change. And a lot of people are not ready for that. Sarah's attitude towards leadership and towards being an administrator when she goes into a new school is, let me just, unless there's something I see that like, oh, legally we're going to get sued. We're going to be in deep trouble if we don't change that right now. Let's just let the marbles go roll around and figure out what the game is and figure out who's who on the staff and figure out where the problems actually are. And then when she's a year in, she can start saying, okay, this policy, we need to amend this. We need to change this. We need to improve this. And it gives, I think, an important aspect of that from a leadership, the staff that is there, that you as a fair manager, you're coming in, you're new, but you may be dealing with people that have always done it this way. And so you come in, if you don't throw all the change right away, if you sit back and watch and observe, it gives all those people a sense of ownership in this new direction that a fair or a school or a business can move. And then they feel like they've been heard before you start making changes. And then I think you get way more buy in from the staff.
Large ships turn slowly, right? And
Yes.
when we're talking about organizations, a lot of them are old. These are ingrained into their history and heritage of how they operate,
Yep.
whether it's a school or a fair or a board of directors. It takes time, and I think it's really like a three-legged stool where you've got to build the trust, you have to build the respect, and you also have to get people to like you. Because if if people don't trust you and they don't like you and they don't respect you, you could be the most ingenious executive that an organization has ever had, and you're gonna fail.
Yep.
It's just it's human nature. We wanna be able to trust the people that lead us, and we need to be able to respect them so we can trust them. And then I think that the liking people is kind of the icing on the cake where then it makes it an enjoyable and fulfilling experience to get to be a part of
Yep.
it.
Yep. Well, and when you like who you're working with, when you like what you do, you're happier at work. And studies show you're approximately 30%, get this, 30% smarter. You make 30% better decisions when you're happy. So if you're
Wow.
coming to work pissed off every day, if you're going, Courtney's coming in, she's changing this. I'm worried, am I going to even lose my job? Am I getting downsized out? You're going to get so bogged down in the minutia of all the stress and get in your head. You're not happy, you're not effective, and you're going to make dumb decisions. Where if you come to work every day and you go, man, I'm in a great mood today. I get to work at the Wyoming State Fair today. Let's go for it. You're going to make better choices.
Oh, I love that you said that, and I think that that goes hand in hand with team culture too, where when you've got sort of a more dictatorial setup where there's one person that is leading the charge and it's their way or the highway, and you're not cultivating that buy-in, it just makes it less of a fun place to work. So we have been going through a complete restructure here at the Wyoming State Fair, where we've got more horizontal leadership, more empowerment, um, still doing a ton of cross training, succession planning for everybody. But it's a much more empowering group, even than it was a year ago or a couple years ago, because we've had this opportunity to restructure. And
Sure.
I think what excites me about that is that's how we're actually making a cultural difference to the organization. Where then if somebody else was in my position, the organization still feels the same. And
Yeah,
that to me shows longevity, and that's exciting.
for sure. Let's switch gears here. I want to talk a little bit about building better relationships between fairs and associates. I know when we were on the phone the other day, kind of planning out a time to get on the podcast, we kind of talked on this a little bit. And so one of the questions I've been asking of fairs, and then I switch the question when it's for an entertainer, but is the following: as a fair manager who handles relationships with entertainers, what's something you wish entertainers understood?
I think that this is a two-way street, but fairs, we don't know what we don't know. And especially as we're talking about transitions and new management and new leadership, you're more likely to work with fair managers that don't know what their electric looks like on their grounds, what your needs are in terms of stage sound and lights, show times, show scheduling, marketing. There's a huge spectrum with what we've seen as a fair with folks that have really great promotional materials or maybe some promotional materials that need some updating, some refinement. But a lot of times the fairs, we won't even know what all to ask. And so I think that just working together between entertainers and fair leadership to have some of those courageous conversations about, what would actually be helpful on both sides so that the fairs we're being transparent with our budgets, we're being honest about what we can and can't provide when it comes to infrastructure, security, green rooms. I just think that that's a really vital part of goes back to the liking, trusting, respecting one another to have relationships with longevity. How can we work better together and roll out some best practices? I think that there's a lot of potential there. Um, but if you don't know what to ask, it's not about asking the right questions or the wrong questions. It's about even knowing where to start with the conversations.
Yeah, that's a good call. One of the things I've discovered with now that I'm traveling with Play with Giants and I've got the trailer is the number of times I get to a fair, and even though it's written down um, in the contract, on two lines, this is the dimensions. the number of times I get to a fair and they really don't have a spot for the trailer. Now we've got to go at the last minute. Now you're juggling one more thing, which as an entertainer, I don't want to be that dude. I don't want to put one more thing on Courtney's plate when she's got 5,000 things on her punch list. You know what I mean? So for me, one of the things I've started doing is I literally put a plot plan, not only for potentially for Play with Giants, which can vary depending on the space, but here is what the RV looks like. Here is where the slide out is. Here are the demand. And it's on its own page.
Mm.
So now a fair manager, when they flip through the contract, they see everything. Now they've got all that information right there. And I think that I've had several fair managers go, that's actually really helpful because we've had, we get told a lot of times on your end, oh, well, this is the price plus I need an RV spot. And they go, okay, I've got an RV spot. But it turns out the act is traveling in a 44-foot tour bus versus a 30-foot trailer. And now where do we put it? How do we turn it around? How do we get it in and out of the fairgrounds? So I think the more information as entertainers that we can provide you guys up front, maybe the easier things are when we get to because if there's I'll give you a perfect example here. Adams County. So Courtney's got me coming into Adams in Brighton, Colorado in August. Tell her I need an RV spot. She comes back to me a couple days later. She goes, we've got a problem. So, okay, what's the problem? She goes, I didn't realize all of my RV spots are already allocated. I have nowhere to put you. Do you absolutely have to have the RV? Or couldn't we store it on the back 40 and I'll cover your hotel?
Hmm.
Isn't that better to have that conversation in April than it is a week before the fair?
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Well, and growing up, going to 30 plus fairs every year, you roll into different fairgrounds and you'll get there at 2 a.m. and every gate is locked. And then you need to plug in your freezer and there's no electric available. And it creates more strife with our business partners. And so I think that is one of the biggest things is we've just got to figure out those platforms to identify what conversations do we need to be having,
Yeah.
asking those up front. And then it's not a one and done. This needs to be a shift where we're having these conversations throughout the year and we're having these conversations as an industry. I think that also goes hand in hand with hospitality development. And that is way more on the fair side because we're the hosts. We need to level up our hospitality. And my family always had a rule. We couldn't complain about being tired until after the season was halfway through. And our season at that point was 30 fairs and rodeos.
Wow.
So after the 16th, then you could say you were tired. And every time that we would go and check out from a fair, 4-day fairs, 5-day fairs, a lot of times the staff is tired. And I respect that. I now have a 5-day fair and I am tired after my fair. Our team here is coached that we cannot say we're tired. We cannot have a bad attitude. But we realized that we have some deficiencies. So we actually are creating a hospitality internship position. And this will be the first year that that intern will be on
Hmm.
board with us. They start next month. And their whole job is making the experience better for our partners and our guests. So, green room, making sure that our entertainers have what they need to have a good experience here, working with marketing and our vendor coordinator to make sure that we've got information about the community, where the laundromats are, where the hardware stores are, what the restaurants are here locally and what their hours are, what you can order, where your closest mechanics are. Anything that gives you a better experience here as our business partner, because that's an area that we need to improve on, and we want to do it in a way that is going to hopefully be something that other fairs can replicate also, and just add a little bit more of that mindfulness because for us, we've got one fair a year that we produce. But for you, what does the season look like for you now?
For me, on a low season, I'm doing 9 or 10 fairs. A busy season, I'm probably doing 14 or 15. Just depends whether they're 5 or 10 day runs.
So
That's a
by the
lot of
time
different.
you
And I know people out there that almost do if they're regional, so they're doing a lot of Wyoming State Fair size where they're 5 days. They're doing 20 fairs a year because on 5-day fairs, that's a lot of different environments to go in and out of.
so by the time you get to August and you roll into and you roll into the Wyoming State Fair, I know for our family, for the Conkles and Conkles concession side, By August, September, the things that wouldn't have been an issue in May, it feels a little more like an issue when the gates are locked or when the power doesn't work or when somebody's in your spot. And so it's about being mindful of that also. So adding just the little soft touches of making sure there's coffee, making sure there's ibuprofen readily available, that there's food, that there's water, that there's resources, that there's emergency numbers. I just think that if we can have a little bit more of a hospitable attitude, that will
Yeah.
make everybody happier. And like you said, that makes us smarter, it makes us more effective and more efficient.
Yeah, I like that because I had never really, I know on my end, it's exactly like you said, but for me, it's by the time I get to, if Dan Morning is listening, I love your fair, Dan. I love New Mexico. But let's be honest, by the time September 5th or 7th rolls around, I am like starting to get gassed. So it's nice to have the hometown fair to be able to just sleep in my own bed that week. But yes, for most of us, by the time we're getting into September, especially if we started in the springtime, even those of us that started in June, you're now 10, 12, 13 weeks into your season, and you might only have a month to go. But yeah, those little things where you show up in June and they go, oh, we can't get you on your spot yet. It's going to be, another 4 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, in June, you're like, yeah, all right, whatever, we can hang out. But by September, you're starting to go, all right, I'm running out of gas. Some of us have done 10, 12, 14,000 miles over the road already, and we're getting tired.
Yep.
So let's talk about conventions. You and I have both done countless conventions, whether it's IFE or WFA, Florida Fed, you name it, we've probably been there. Pretty much every convention has a trade show, just like what we see at IFE, but with very little variation on that theme. So I pose this question, and to our listeners as well, is the trade show as we know it the most effective way to connect fairs and associates?
As somebody that goes to 10 plus conventions a year, and I know you're in that same boat, I think that it comes down to how are we measuring the success of this? I'm a love qualifiers, but I'm a quantification kind of gal. What does success at a trade show look like for you as an entertainer? And is that a question that is being asked by the various conventions and associations you attend?
Right. Well, and it's even being asked by the entertainers, because I've had these conversations and the entertainers go, I didn't book anything. This is terrible. And I'm like, I created 3 brand new relationships that could turn into something in 2 years that I didn't have before. So I'm good. But others are like, if the contract's not signed, then it was terrible.
That's interesting. So I feel like that's one thing that for me I struggle with because I just don't know what those mile markers are. Are you, for very many of the conventions that you go to, do you get a post convention trade show vendor survey that's specific?
Yeah, most of them will have some level of follow-up. I
Okay.
know Florida, we just did ours for Florida Fed. It's not super specific in the questioning, and there's, basically it was rate the trade show 1 through 5 or whatever, 5 being the best. What could we improve on? And then it's like there's an empty box of type in all your, it's a comment box. So could the questions be more specific? Yeah, I mean, I would love, and I think fair associations that put on their own trade shows should be asking, what does success look like for, and maybe even you do this, because this thought just popped into my head. So here I am, like scatterbrained. I'm going for it. Instead of doing it do it on the follow up for sure. But when the associate fills out the trade show application, when they fill out the form to sign up for the trade show, I think you should ask them then, what needs to happen for you to call this a successful trade show? And that's really like, that's a sales 101 question.
Mhm.
What if we move forward with this deal, if we move forward with this marketing plan, if I'm going to be your creative design person, what would success look like for you? I need to know that. And I ask that a lot of times with my fairs. If you bring in Play with Giants, what would it look like for Play with Giants to be successful at your fair? Because now I know what that bar looks like for what the fair is expecting. And I think the fair associations could ask that question. what would have to happen for you to call this a successful trade show?
Well, and then I think that makes it be a more honest relationship because people give you the answers to the test. And if somebody comes back and they go, I need to book 24 fairs for this to be successful, you can probably go, hey, I don't know that that's a realistic goal. And we want to be
Right.
upfront with you about it. You know,
Right.
like just the ability to collaborate on that, I think has a lot of potential.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you get the answer, if you're the association, if you're the Florida Federation of Fairs, and I'll pick on them because we just did their convention last month. If you get somebody that fills out that question that says, I need to book, I'm brand new into Florida fairs. I want to book 5 fairs and that's success. Then maybe a phone call needs to be had to say, hey, we just want to make sure that you understand this is what you're coming into and this is what you can expect, and are these the most realistic goals? And that way you help the person understand. It doesn't mean don't come. We would absolutely still want you at Florida Fed. We want you at IFE. We want you there, but we want to make sure you have realistic goals, because if your goals are more realistic, then you're more likely to walk away going, actually, I only booked 1 show, but I had 5 really good leads. That was a good show. I'm excited about what happened.
Robert, are there any of the trade shows that you do where they do any kind of referral code? Like if you find me at the Rocky Mountain Association of Fairs through this membership, you get $300 off my week show.
I think that's more associate to associate based. I know there
Okay.
are people that hand out like a little business card or something that's got a promo rate that's something like, if you type in code IFE,
Mhm.
into in the website or whatever, then I'll knock $250 off. Or if you book, these are the convention rates, just like you see, like, when you go to the home show at a
Yeah.
fairgrounds and they're selling the hot tubs and they go, this is the show special. If you wait for 2 weeks and then come into the showroom, that's going to be a different price. I do see some of that. But I don't know. I've never really followed up with anybody on how successful those have been.
Okay. That's an interesting one for me just because I look at the ability to quantify. So especially when you're going to, if you're somebody that's hitting WFA, IFE, RMAF, and you've got all of these pretty significant conventions within a 6-week window of time, I would love to know, when did somebody make the determination to book me? Was
Yeah,
it the first time that they interfaced with me at the Wyoming Association of Fairs conference or at Oregon Fairs Association? Or was it after we actually sat down and we ran through everything that they could provide for the fair at IFE?
sure.
It's just an interesting one, but I think that figuring out where the mile markers are would be the first spot for me to be able to really answer if this is the most beneficial way to continue the trade shows as we know them, or if there's other ways that we could make it a more mutually beneficial, successful collaboration.
Sure. That's one of the things that got started at IFE, was that breakfast that they do on Tuesday morning, where there's like, I don't know, 30 fairman, 25 fairmanders or something like that, and 20 or 25 associates. And the idea is you have breakfast, and then all the associates go to a little 6-foot table. And you've done this before. You work your way around the room and you have these little speed dating sessions, if you will, that are like 4 or 5 minutes long. One of the things I really enjoy about that is, now when you come sit at my table, I've got 5 interrupted minutes with you, and you're going to go in that room, and in an hour and a half, you're going to meet 25 new people. One of my challenges with the trade show as a whole is, so much of it is just catching up. Hey, we haven't seen you forever. How's it going? And so the fair manager that I might need to talk to is 2 aisles over, having a 25-minute conversation with someone. And if they're enjoying themselves and they're having a good time, I'm good with that. I have no problem. But then you get your fair managers start getting burned out, because there's only so many times you can walk up to somebody in a trade show and go, tell me about what you do. Tell me about what you do. Tell me, before you're starting to go, it's sensory overload. We all know in that at IAFE's trade show is complete sensory overload, because we're loud, we're colorful, we've got stilt walkers, we've got, somebody might have a eagle or something, an iguana or an alligator, who knows what animals are in there. And as you guys have walked through, IAV is a big trade show, and it starts, I can see where it starts to wear you guys out. And now if you're getting tired, you're less receptive to what I've got to say about what I'm doing.
The two things that I think I'd say for this, one, if there's any listeners that have not been to the buyer's breakfast that have decision making authority for entertainment, I recommend it so wholeheartedly. It is one of the best things that I've ever gotten to do at a convention. I've made so many connections, relationships, booked so many folks there because for me, I get incredibly overstimulated. But that's also because I'm not neurotypical. So there's a lot going on and I really struggle with the trade shows. But that's because of how I operate as an individual. So I
Sure.
also know that for me, I do a lot of pre-research on who's going to be at the trade show. I check out their websites. I try to find clips on YouTube. And I think that I would also encourage anybody that is making decisions for their fair to do that pre-work too and kind of know what you're shopping for, where you still have openings, vacancies, but also the ones you want to make sure you connect with and get to meet face to face. Because that's the only way that I'm able to not just have to go lay in my bed for a couple hours after the trade show and like de-stim because there's a lot going on. But that buyer's breakfast, I've gotten so much out of it. So I really appreciate that that's an opportunity that's been provided the past few years.
Yeah, that my first experience with a scenario like that, I was invited out to do Connect meetings in Louisville several years ago. And Connect, I guess they now own BizBash, so they're corporate event planners. So that trade show that they have, the majority of booths you're going to see there are like the city of San Antonio, right? They're the people that are trying to get IFE to come and host their convention, right? So you got a handful of entertainers in there, but it's a lot of convention and visitors bureau people like that. But you also have this huge group of event planners, and so I was scheduled in to go have these meetings. And when I did this, it's just like our buyer's breakfast. There was no breakfast. It was just you go and you have little 5-minute speed dating sessions, and the buyers are sitting still, and me as the person who's selling something goes and meets with 8 or 10 or 20 different people during the day. The second I saw that format, I texted Steve Seaver and I said, we are out of our minds if we don't do this at IEF because there's so much more value to it. You know, when you think about it, one, it keeps the pace moving. You got 4 or 5 minutes,
Yeah.
whatever the number is, move on. I need enough from me to wet your whistle and decide I'm interested. I want to know more. As soon as you're at that point, you write your note down that says, here's the guy I want to follow up with. And then a week after IFE, you would call and say, hey, Robert, wanted to have a conversation about and expand on such and such versus getting into the trade show at IFE as it is now. And we're all visiting our friends and we're 20, 30-minute conversations trying to hash the whole deal out right there on the floor. And kudos to the people that can do that. I just think there's a better way to keep the flow of the trade show moving, get more interactions, generate more leads, and create better relationships for everybody.
Yeah.
So let's switch up here because we're coming up on just about an hour. And I know we're starting to get kind of under your time crunch in the next 15 minutes or so. But I want to get to know Courtny just a little bit because there's the Courtny Conkle who's the fair manager, and then there's the Courtny Conkle who's like the regular average human being. And, you know, you've got hopes and dreams and all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious if you could change places with one person for a day, who would it be? And what are you hoping to experience with that change?
It's a really good question. I think for me, I would want to change places with the president. I think it would do two things. I think it would make me more graceful and compassionate, but I also think it would give me an opportunity to write an executive order to clarify some of the H-2B visa language. Then we could save ourselves a lot of time the next couple of years hashing things out. But
Selfish. It's a selfish change.
it's not selfish, it's for the greater good, Robert. But I also legitimately think that with politics, there's so much that we just don't see that
Yes.
it's easy to beat people up. And no matter who's in the presidential position, I think that it would make me a better citizen of the United States to have an
Yes.
understanding of what that job truly would entail.
I would
And I would
agree.
only want to do it for one day.
And
So
that's probably not a bad idea, even though I'm not particularly a fan of the current administration. I think I would probably develop more empathy for the role, not necessarily the
Yes.
man, but for the role itself. I hear people talk about like when Trump would meet with Kim Jong Un or when he talked with China or Putin, and of course there's always all these arguments over, oh, it's a puppet, he shouldn't meet with brutal dictators and whatnot, and I'm like, I come from the school of thought, from Chris Voss, who was the FBI negotiator who dealt with terrorists, who negotiated with terrorists. You may not like Vladimir Putin, but he's a human being and he's got his finger on a nuclear button. Kim Jong Un's got, he's got weapons that he's developing that he could drop on Seoul, South Korea. You want to have relationships with those people. It doesn't mean you got to be all buddy buddy, but you need to have a relationship with them. So to understand that side, the news only ever says, oh, well, this is what President Biden did or what President Trump did with Vladimir Putin. And it's like, but there's more, way more going on behind the scenes than any of us ever know.
The humanization and the grace, and we do this with people in all leadership positions. It doesn't matter if it's a political figure or a doctor or an officer.
Yep.
We put people into positions and then we forget that they're human beings just like us. So anytime that we can kind of reverse that narrative and just remember that people are just trying to do the best they can with the information they have at the time, and hope that that's really truly the case.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that answer because I always think, oh, if I would be president, what would I do? And it's like, maybe I would just listen. Maybe
Yep.
I would just take it all in and absorb and be like, there's people out there that don't like Trump and there's people out there that don't like Biden or whomever the politician is. But to have some empathy and grace for that position, I think says a lot about a person to be able to look at that and go, well, maybe I would have made a different decision, but it's different when you're the one that everybody, it's Sarah's an assistant principal is prone to say, there's something about being the number two person because when like the building's on fire, you can be like, well, what do we do? You know,
Hmm.
and ultimately it's number one that the decision rests with. Just like
Yeah.
as the fair manager, you can say all you want. Well, so and so dropped the ball over there, or so and so dropped the ball over here, but you're the number one.
Yep.
You're the
It's
top
your
dog. So did
responsibility.
you put the wrong person in the wrong position? Like, and that's where Sarah looks at it. She's like, if Shelby and I, her principal, like if we get the wrong person in the wrong position, that's on both of us because we both ultimately were the ones that did the interview and agreed to hire them. Like we can't
Yep.
put that on the first grade level or whoever. Like when you're number one, you're number one. Is there a core memory? Switching this up here, is there a core memory you have from your childhood that still sticks with you to this day?
I feel like I'm too young to truly remember this, but I remember being at, believe it was the North Georgia State Fair when I was just little tiny and taking my first steps. And
Oh,
we've got it on video because my dad was filming the carnival ride that was behind me. And I just happened to kind of bubble across. So,
that's
but
awesome.
I remember my mom telling my dad, "Christopher, Christopher, are you getting this?" And he goes, "Yeah." And then you see him pan down, and I I remember I remember that way too clearly.
That, yeah, the first steps on a fairground, that's amazing. That's a cool moment, but let's talk about a challenging moment. Can you share about a failure that you faced and how you recovered from it?
I'm a big believer that we all fail every day and that's how we get better. But last year at our 2023 fair, we just had a really challenging year. It started off with a fatality that occurred with somebody on their way to the fair that happened about 4 miles away. And then we had a series of about 15 just of the weirdest occurrences that you could possibly think of that happened from opening day to closing night of our state fair. But one of our key team members, you just talked about, right people, right positions. We had somebody that had a health crisis on our team and they were not able to be here for the full fair. And it's essentially my right hand person. So they ended up making a career pivot, and I totally respect that. And we've got a new person in that role. But it was a huge wake up call for me as a leader that I had failed in the sense that we did not have a plan in place if one of our key players couldn't come to work. And I, Robert, I pride myself on succession planning and longevity, and we've got all of these, resources in place. But for fair time, it's a little bit different. So we have actually now rolled out an incident command plan where each of our positions identifies everything that has to be done each day of the fair
Right.
for us to be successful, not get into legal trouble, and for the fair to take place. And we've assigned understudies for those, but also now we have a plan where if multiple of us are unable to come to the fair, or if there's a critical incident, we know every task that has to be completed. So those people that are left standing can come together, reassign the work, and the fair can take place. Cause that was a wake up call for me as a leader that I had
Sure.
failed to have a plan other than everyone will be here for the duration of the fair.
Yeah. Well, and there's so many little details like that to think about when you're in leadership. Like who has the keys?
Yeah.
Who's got the master key? Oh, we know Courtney's got a master key. The director of maintenance probably has a master key. What if both of you are injured? What if something happens? And now who's got the master key to the fire cabinet or whatever it is? All
Yep.
those little details matter. Wow. Yeah, and I think I might have
Exactly.
been involved in one of those little emergencies of those 15 crazy situations that you had happen.
You were, and
And
I
that
I
one,
am
honestly, it was
eternally
probably the worst
grateful.
for you. That one, if you want to
It
share it,
was.
I'll let
So,
you share it at your
yeah,
discretion. But
we had, we had just a challenging day at the fair, and the last thing we do every night is go and turn off all the lights, and my dog got hurt while we were doing that,
yep,
and for most people, I guess it wouldn't have been a major injury, but for me, uh, for those of you that don't know me super well, kids is not something that's in the cards for me, and so I live vicariously through fairs and my dog. Those are like my 2
right.
my 2 things that'll be my legacy, and Finn got hurt, he got slashed down the leg, and he just started gushing blood, and most things, I'm pretty prompt and I'm pretty together. I had an absolute breakdown, and I start crying and screaming, and who is walking by? Robert,
Yeah,
and
I was just walking
just
back to the Play with Giants tent because there had been a storm that came through, and I wanted to make sure everything was still copacetic. That was it.
oh
Just
my
happened to
gosh,
walk by.
it was one of those just absolute fate things. So Robert runs, comes back with gauze.
He
We
came
do
back with my
emergency.
bleed kit that said Play with
Oh my god.
Giants.
It was just, I me and Jeff were talking about this the other day. I think I owe Finn's life to you, and Finn is the most important, like, he's my child. He's my little border collie child, and did emergency triage. We call the vet. My dog had to go in for emergency surgery, and it took him about 2 months on crate rest, and this is a dog that runs with me between 6 and 10 miles every day. And so, um, I am eternally grateful to you and for you because you saved my dog's life.
I don't
That
know
was
about
such
that.
a
I just
I
I
I
just put pressure. I just got some gauze and put pressure on the wound. That was it.
oh my gosh, that was, of all the things that could happen during fair, that is the one thing that I was the least prepared for, and the one thing that my heart and soul cannot take.
Oh
But
yeah.
it was a lot of, those personal things, though. My dad had a staph infection, so he was in the hospital for most of the fair,
Yep.
and my mom lives in on Maui in Lanai, and during my fair last year, Lanai was kind of a little bit up in flames. So outside of just all the weird things that had come up during state fair, we had a lot of very odd personal things transpire as well. So thank you for helping to make it a better experience, and oh my gosh, for just being so steadfast in that because it was definitely the weirdest fair I've ever produced.
Was there a moment during that fair that you just like you're back at your house, you're getting your pajamas on at the end of the night, and you're looking in the mirror and you're going, "What the hell happened this week? What did I do wrong?"
I had spoons in the freezer, and I would get home at night and just put them over my eyes. I'm going, "This is crazy. This is, like, something out of just the Twilight Zone." And there was a few moments last year where I'm going, "Maybe this is a nightmare. Maybe I'm just in a weird bad dream, and we'll get out of it." But to wrap it up with it though, those are the things that make us stronger and better and more resilient because they show us where our deficiencies are and it inspires us. You can either lay down and give up or you can figure out how you come back better and stronger. And I think for our team, we trauma bonded a lot and we are back stronger and better and with a stronger plan in place. And that's all good.
Yeah, for sure. What is something people would be surprised to learn about you?
That I'm a retired competitive eater.
What does that mean?
I used to be a competitive eater.
What you ate pies? You ate hot dogs like they did the Nathan's hot dog challenge or
Yeah, I was hot dogs, donuts, corn, watermelon,
uh,
cake, ribs one time. That's a really dangerous one. You have to be so careful. But yeah, I almost died in a hot dog eating contest and I'm not kidding. And
come on.
um I reevaluated my life decisions at that point and I retired. I have come out of retirement once and that was down in Mexico.
Of
I
course.
I went, I swept the competition, um, and then I've been retired ever since again.
Right. Retired competitive eater. I would have had no idea. Well, let's wrap this up. I got one final question for you. If your life had a theme song, what would that song be?
I think it would only be fitting for it to be like the dun 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 dun, like the traditional fair theme.
Oh yeah, I can see that. Like the on the merry-go-round on the carousel.
Exactly.
Yep, yeah, that old traditional tune. That would absolutely be your theme song. Awesome, Courtney. Where can listeners connect with you?
So I am on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all at Courtney. There's no E in my name, Conkle, Conkle. And then to stick with the Wyoming State Fair, we're at WY State Fair on our website and all of our handles.
Awesome. To our listeners, we're glad you could be with us. I would be curious for any of you as you were listening when we were talking about things like the trade show and how to build better relationships between fairs and associates. If you've got thoughts on that, we'd love to hear them. You can leave a message or DM me a message on Facebook or email me or comment on the post when this episode goes up. We would love to hear your opinions on this discussion as well. Thank you all for being with us. We'll see you next week. Bye bye.